Salvo a una mujer apache de ahogarse, por la sagrada, su tribu pertenece. John had always loved being outdoors. There was something about the fresh air, the sound of birds, and the gentle flow of rivers that made him feel calm and alive. That morning, he woke up early in the small cabin where he was staying, tucked away near the edge of a large forest. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting golden rays across the landscape. Today, he had decided to take a long walk along the river that ran close to the cabin. It was a quiet place, far from the city's noise, where he could enjoy nature and think about life. As John walked, he noticed the forest opening up to reveal a wide stretch of water. The river looked peaceful, with small ripples reflecting the sunlight like tiny diamonds. Birds chirped happily from the trees, and he could hear the gentle rustle of leaves as a soft breeze moved through the forest. He took a deep breath and felt grateful for the simplicity of the moment. He was enjoying himself, taking small steps on the soft, damp soil, feeling completely alone yet strangely connected to the world around him. Suddenly, a sound broke through the calm. It was a cry, sharp and full of fear. John froze, straining his ears to understand what it was. The cry came again, louder this time, and it seemed to be coming from the river. His heart beat faster. Without thinking too much, he ran toward the sound. As he got closer, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A young woman was struggling in the water, her arms flailing, trying desperately to keep her head above the surface. She was caught in a strong current that pulled her toward a deeper part of the river. John's mind raced, but he didn't hesitate. He knew he had to help her. He ran to the edge of the river, searching for a safe way to reach her. The ground was slippery, and the water looked cold and dangerous, but he could see her struggling, panicking, and that gave him courage. He took a deep breath, calmed his mind, and jumped into the water. The current was strong and the cold hit him immediately, but he focused on swimming toward her. Every stroke was challenging, but he kept moving, keeping his eyes fixed on the young woman. When he finally reached her, she was exhausted and terrified. She tried to hold on to him, and he guided her carefully, making sure both of them stayed afloat. He whispered calm words, telling her that everything would be okay, even though he could feel the panic rising in his own chest. Slowly, step by step, they made their way to the shallow part of the river. Once their feet touched the bottom, John helped her stand, supporting her so she wouldn't fall again. Her chest heaved as she gasped for air, her eyes wide with fear and relief at the same time. Once they were safely on the riverbank, John stepped back and looked at her. She was drenched from head to toe, shivering, but she was alive. He noticed that she was young, with long dark hair clinging to her face. Her eyes were full of emotion, relief, gratitude, and something else he couldn't quite understand at the moment. He offered her a smile, hoping it would calm her, but he could see that she was still scared. He pointed to a nearby tree and suggested they sit down for a moment to catch their breath. As they sat on the soft grass, wrapped in their thoughts and the sound of the river flowing nearby, the young woman finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, but there was a strength in it. "Thank you," she said simply. John nodded, trying to find words to respond. "It's okay." "You're safe now," he said. They didn't speak much after that. Words seemed unnecessary. The river had been terrifying, and now there was a quiet peace that hung between them, broken only by the gentle breeze and the distant call of a bird. John realized he didn't know anything about her, who she was, where she came from, or why she had been near the river alone. But he didn't feel the need to ask immediately. For now, it was enough that she was safe. He offered her his jacket to keep warm, and she accepted, wrapping it around her shoulders. He noticed the way she looked around, as if she was thinking about her next step, about returning to her home or finding her family. John didn't want to intrude, but he wanted to make sure she was truly safe before she left. After a few moments, John helped her stand, and they began walking slowly toward a small path leading away from the river. The young woman moved carefully, still recovering from the shock, and John walked beside her, making sure she didn't stumble. The forest was quiet again, and he felt a strange sense of calm. He was proud that he had acted quickly to help someone in need, but he also felt a deep respect for the young woman who had faced a dangerous situation and survived. As they walked, John noticed small details about her. She wore simple clothes, but they were neat and well kept. She moved gracefully, even though she was clearly tired. Her eyes, dark and expressive, showed intelligence and resilience. John realized that saving her life had created a connection between them, a bond that couldn't be explained easily. It wasn't just about him helping her. It was about the human instinct to care for one another, to protect life when it was in danger. Eventually, they reached a clearing where a few people were waiting nearby. John's heart skipped a beat as he realized they were members of her community. They came forward quickly, concerned but relieved, asking questions in a language John didn't understand. The young woman stepped forward to speak with them, her voice filled with emotion. John could see that they were grateful, but there was also a look of curiosity directed at him. He smiled politely and nodded, trying to communicate that he meant no harm. One of the elders, a tall man with a calm but commanding presence, came closer and spoke slowly, gesturing toward John. Even though John didn't understand all the words, he could feel the meaning behind them. They were talking about what had happened at the river and about his role in saving the young woman. John felt a mix of pride and nervousness. He hadn't expected any recognition, but it was clear that this small act had significant meaning to them. The young woman, now steady on her feet, turned to John and gave him a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," she said again, and John realized that no words could fully express the relief and gratitude in that moment. He nodded, feeling a warmth in his chest that went beyond pride. It was the simple truth that saving a life, just one life, was worth every risk, every moment of fear. He had acted without hesitation, and now he could see the impact of his actions not just on her, but on the community that cared for her. That day by the river became a memory John would carry forever. It wasn't just about heroism. It was about connection, humanity, and the unexpected ways life brings people together. He had stepped into a situation he didn't fully understand, guided only by instinct and compassion. And in doing so, he had not only saved a life, but he had also entered a world of traditions, respect, and human stories that he would soon learn were far deeper than he had ever imagined. The river, once calm and quiet, now held a story of courage, gratitude, and the beginning of a journey neither John nor the young woman could have predicted. It was a day that started like any other but ended as the first chapter of an extraordinary tale. After the river incident, John found himself in a situation far different from anything he had experienced before. He had saved the young woman, whose name he learned was Aeon, but he soon discovered that his act of bravery had consequences he had never imagined. The community she belonged to, a small Apache tribe living near the river and the surrounding forest, welcomed him with a mixture of respect, curiosity, and caution. John quickly realized that this was not a normal meeting between strangers. There were rules, traditions, and expectations that he did not yet understand. As he spent time with the tribe, John observed their daily life. People worked together in harmony, helping one another with tasks like gathering food, caring for children, and maintaining the small homes that dotted the landscape. It was clear that the community valued cooperation, respect, and a deep connection to their land. John admired this way of life, and he wanted to learn as much as he could. But he also sensed that the elders were watching him closely, trying to understand his intentions. One afternoon, while sitting near a fire with a few of the elders, John learned something that made him pause. Through a careful mixture of gestures, broken English, and slow translation by Aeon, he discovered that the tribe had a sacred law. According to this law, if someone saves the life of a woman from the tribe, they were considered bound to her in a special way. The law was not just a tradition, it was a part of their culture that had existed for generations. It dictated that the savior would have a lasting role in her life, and by extension, in the life of the tribe. John was surprised. He had acted on instinct without thinking about traditions or rules. Now he realized that his single act of courage had placed him in a position he had not anticipated. John tried to understand what this law meant in practice. The elders explained that it was not meant to be a burden, but a form of respect and responsibility. The person who saved a life was expected to help, protect, and support the woman, not just immediately after the incident, but in meaningful ways over time. It was a role that required trust, patience, and a willingness to learn the customs and values of the tribe. John felt a mix of emotions. He was honored that the tribe trusted him, but he also felt unsure about how he could fulfill this role, given that he was an outsider with little knowledge of their culture. Over the next few days, John began to adapt to life among the tribe. Aeon guided him, explaining the small but important details of their daily routine. She showed him how to gather herbs, how to help with simple chores, and how to interact respectfully with different members of the community. At first, John struggled. He was used to his independent life and his own ways of doing things, but he soon realized that his efforts mattered. Even small gestures, like helping carry water or preparing food, earned nods of approval and smiles from the elders. He felt a growing sense of connection to the tribe, even though he knew he had a lot to learn. One morning, as the sun rose and cast a warm glow over the forest, John accompanied Aeon to a nearby clearing where the tribe held small gatherings and ceremonies. This was a new experience for him, one that required patience and observation. The elders spoke in their native language, singing and chanting softly. John watched respectfully, trying to understand the meaning behind their actions. Aeon explained that these rituals were about gratitude, respect, and the balance of life. They honored not only their ancestors but also the natural world around them. John felt humbled. He realized that saving Aeon's life had connected him to something far bigger than himself, a community, a culture, and a tradition that had lasted for generations. As he spent more time with Aeon and the tribe, John noticed the trust and admiration growing between them. Aeon appreciated his willingness to learn and to help, and he, in turn, felt a sense of responsibility to honor the sacred law. He began to see that his role was not simply about being a helper. It was about understanding, respecting, and becoming part of a community that valued life in a way he had never experienced. This was challenging but also deeply rewarding. John found himself reflecting on his life before the river incident and realizing how much he had taken for granted. Despite the growing trust, John also faced challenges. He had to navigate situations that were completely unfamiliar. At times he felt out of place, unsure of how to act, and even worried that he might accidentally offend someone. But every time he tried, Aeon was there to guide him patiently. She explained that mistakes were part of learning and that the tribe valued effort and sincerity over perfection. John found comfort in this approach, and it encouraged him to continue learning, even when he felt uncertain. One afternoon, a discussion among the elders focused on John's future within the tribe. They spoke seriously, sharing their perspectives on what it meant for him to be connected to Aeon through the sacred law. John listened carefully, understanding that this was not a simple decision. It was not about friendship alone or curiosity. It was about commitment, respect, and honoring a tradition that had guided the tribe for generations. John felt a mixture of pride, humility, and nervousness. He knew that his life might change in ways he had not planned, but he also understood that this was an opportunity to grow, to connect deeply, and to make a meaningful difference. As the days turned into weeks, John continued to learn the ways of the tribe. He participated in daily activities, helped with small projects, and observed ceremonies. Aeon became both a teacher and a companion, guiding him gently and answering his questions with patience. John noticed that he was no longer just an outsider. People in the tribe began to recognize his efforts and sincerity. They smiled at him, spoke with him, and included him in their routines. John realized that the sacred law, once a mysterious rule, was now shaping his life in a positive way. It was teaching him about responsibility, humility, and the importance of community. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with shades of orange and pink, John and Aeon sat by the river, reflecting on the events that had brought them together. John thought about the moment he had jumped into the water to save her, the fear he had felt, and the adrenaline that had carried him through. Now, he realized that the river had not just saved her life, it had started a journey for both of them. Aeon smiled softly, acknowledging the bond that had formed between them. They did not speak much, but the silence was comfortable. It was filled with understanding, gratitude, and the quiet realization that their lives were now intertwined. Through this experience, John learned lessons that could not be taught in books or classrooms. He discovered the value of patience, respect, and learning from others. He understood that actions, even those done without thought of recognition, could carry deep significance. And he realized that connecting with a community, especially one so rich in tradition, required not just effort but an open heart and willingness to adapt. For John, the sacred law was no longer a rule to fear. It was a guide that helped him navigate a new world with humility, respect, and care. By the end of this part of his journey, John had transformed. He was still the young traveler who loved the outdoors, but he was now someone who carried responsibility, respect, and understanding in his heart. He knew that saving Aeon's life was only the beginning. What mattered most was how he would honor the trust placed in him, embrace the traditions of the tribe, and build a meaningful relationship based on respect, care, and genuine connection. The river, once a place of danger, had become a symbol of change, growth, and the start of a journey that would continue to shape his life in ways he had never imagined. As days turned into weeks, John found himself more deeply woven into the life of the tribe. What had started as a moment of crisis, the river, the fear, the rescue, was now evolving into a longer, richer journey. John understood that saving Aeon had changed not only her life but his as well. The sacred law, which had once seemed strange and overwhelming, was now guiding him toward understanding, respect, and connection. Each day brought new lessons, new experiences, and new insights about the tribe, Aeon, and even himself. John's mornings often began before sunrise. He would wake to the soft sounds of the forest, birds singing, leaves rustling, and the faint murmur of the river flowing nearby. Aeon was usually awake as well, quietly preparing for the day. John admired her calmness and her dedication to her people. She moved with grace and purpose, never rushing, yet always completing her tasks with efficiency. Watching her, John realized that her strength came not only from her physical ability, but also from her deep understanding of her culture, traditions, and surroundings. He felt lucky to learn from her. Aeon guided John through many aspects of the tribe's daily life. She showed him how to gather edible plants and herbs from the forest, teaching him which leaves, roots, and berries were safe to eat. John learned that each plant had a story, a purpose, and a connection to the land. Aeon explained that the tribe had relied on the knowledge of the natural world for generations, and that every plant, tree, and stream held meaning. At first, John found it difficult to remember the names and uses of the plants, but Aeon was patient. She encouraged him to observe carefully, to ask questions, and to respect the natural world rather than merely using it. In the afternoons, John often helped with chores around the small homes of the tribe. Tasks that had seemed simple at first, carrying water, repairing fences, or preparing food, were actually rich with tradition and meaning. John learned that every action had a purpose, not only for survival, but also for maintaining harmony within the community. He began to appreciate how each person's effort contributed to the whole, and he understood that the sacred law he had learned about extended beyond his connection with Aeon. It was about responsibility, respect, and living in a way that honored both people and nature. As John adapted to daily life, his bond with Aeon grew stronger. They began to spend time together beyond necessary chores and guidance. They walked through the forest, quietly observing birds and animals, and shared stories about their lives. Aeon spoke of her childhood, the traditions her parents had taught her, and the importance of community. John shared stories of his own life, his travels, and his experiences in places far from this forest. Even though they came from very different worlds, they found common ground in curiosity, respect, and a desire to learn from one another. One day, while sitting by the river that had first brought them together, Aeon shared a story that had been passed down through generations of her tribe. It was about a young woman who had faced danger, and how her community had always come together to protect and support her. The story emphasized the value of courage, wisdom, and trust. John listened intently, realizing that the story reflected his own experience, even though it had happened long before he arrived. He felt a deep sense of connection, not only with Aeon but with the history, culture, and values that shaped the tribe. That afternoon, the river seemed even more significant, not as a place of danger, but as a symbol of life, trust, and community. As time passed, John began to participate in small ceremonies and gatherings within the tribe. These events were deeply meaningful, full of songs, rituals, and gestures that honored their ancestors and the natural world. At first, John felt unsure, sometimes embarrassed by his lack of knowledge or skill. But Aeon and the elders encouraged him gently. They emphasized sincerity over perfection, reminding him that effort and respect mattered more than precise technique. Through these experiences, John learned to slow down, to observe, and to appreciate the depth of meaning in every action. He realized that the sacred law was not just about his role with Aeon. It was a path to understanding the broader values of the tribe. During these gatherings, John noticed how Aeon's presence and her trust in him influenced others in the community. The elders, who had once watched him cautiously, began to nod with approval, acknowledging his efforts. Other members of the tribe approached him with questions, shared stories, and invited him to help in their daily tasks. John felt a sense of belonging that he had never experienced before. He understood that the bond created by saving Aeon's life was more than an obligation. It was a bridge that connected him to a community, a culture, and a way of life that was rich, meaningful, and enduring. Evenings often brought quiet moments where John and Aeon would sit together near the fire. They did not always speak. Sometimes they simply watched the flames dance and listened to the forest around them. John felt a growing sense of peace in these moments. He reflected on how much he had learned, how far he had come, and how much more there was to discover. Aeon's guidance, patience, and understanding had become invaluable. Through her, he was learning not only about her culture, but also about empathy, respect, and the importance of human connection. John also began to understand that the sacred law carried a deeper purpose. It was not meant to restrict him or dictate his life. Instead, it provided a framework for learning, growth, and meaningful relationships. The law emphasized respect, trust, and shared responsibility. John realized that it was shaping him into someone who could contribute positively, not just as an outsider who happened to save a life, but as a person who understood and honored the values of the tribe. This realization inspired him to continue learning, listening, and observing with care. There were challenges, of course. Some days were difficult. John struggled with certain tasks or found it hard to understand the subtleties of the tribe's customs. At times, he felt the weight of responsibility and wondered if he could live up to the expectations. But Aeon's quiet encouragement and the support of the elders reminded him that learning was a process. They valued sincerity, effort, and an open heart. Slowly, John began to feel more confident. He could see that his presence, his actions, and his willingness to respect the culture mattered to the community. Over time, John noticed a shift in his relationship with Aeon. It was no longer just about teacher and learner or savior and rescued. Their connection had deepened into mutual respect, trust, and genuine friendship. They shared moments of laughter, curiosity, and reflection. John admired Aeon's intelligence, resilience, and calm strength. Aeon, in turn, appreciated John's willingness to learn, his patience, and his courage. Together, they began to navigate the complexities of life within the tribe, supporting one another while respecting the sacred laws and traditions that surrounded them. One afternoon, John observed a simple yet powerful moment that left a lasting impression. A young child in the tribe had fallen while playing near the riverbank. Without hesitation, John ran to help, catching the child before they could get hurt. The elders and other members of the tribe watched quietly. Afterward, the child's parents thanked him, and John realized that he was no longer an outsider. His actions mattered, and he was becoming part of the community through sincerity, care, and respect. The sacred law that had first seemed intimidating was now a guide, showing him how to act, connect, and grow within this world. As part 3 of his journey came to a close, John understood that his time with Aeon and the tribe was about more than learning new skills or following traditions. It was about understanding human connection, respecting cultures different from his own, and realizing that life is richer when approached with empathy and openness. The bond he shared with Aeon had grown into something meaningful, grounded in trust and mutual respect. The river, the forest, and the tribe's traditions had all shaped him, guiding him toward growth and understanding. John knew that this journey was just beginning, and that the lessons he was learning would stay with him forever. As the weeks turned into months, John felt more at home among the tribe, yet he also realized that living within a new culture brought challenges he had never anticipated. What had once seemed like a straightforward connection with Aeon and the community now required him to navigate complicated expectations, responsibilities, and the delicate balance of respect. He had learned much about their traditions, daily life, and ceremonies, but there were moments that tested not only his patience, but also his understanding of what it truly meant to belong. One morning, the elders gathered the community to discuss matters of importance. John, as someone who had saved Aeon's life, was invited to sit and listen. Although he understood only parts of the conversation through Aeon's translation, he could sense the seriousness in the elders' voices. They were speaking about traditions, responsibilities, and the role he now played. John realized that his presence was no longer neutral, it carried significance. Every word he spoke, every action he took, could influence how he was seen by the tribe. This was both empowering and daunting. As days went on, John noticed subtle tensions. Some members of the tribe were welcoming and kind, while others seemed wary of him. He understood that they were protective of their customs and cautious about outsiders. Even though he had saved Aeon's life, his presence was new, unfamiliar, and required proof of sincerity over time. He began to feel the weight of expectation. His actions were observed carefully, whether he participated in ceremonies properly, helped with daily tasks consistently, or interacted respectfully with others. Each day demanded mindfulness, patience, and humility. John realized that fulfilling the sacred law meant more than simply helping Aeon. It required understanding her life, her community, and the deeper meaning of her culture. He had to respect boundaries, follow traditions, and demonstrate commitment without hesitation. At times he struggled. He occasionally misunderstood instructions, missed subtle cues, or felt unsure about his role. But Aeon was patient, explaining that learning took time and that mistakes were part of the process. Her support encouraged him to keep trying, to listen more attentively, and to reflect carefully on his behavior and intentions. One afternoon, a disagreement arose among some of the tribe members. They were discussing a routine task, but voices grew louder and tension filled the air. John, unsure of how to react, watched carefully. He felt a mix of fear and responsibility, knowing that any misstep could upset the fragile balance he had been building. Aeon gently guided him aside and explained what had happened. Some members were concerned about his role and his understanding of the sacred law. John listened, understanding that trust could not be demanded. It had to be earned through consistency, patience, and respect. Determined to prove his sincerity, John dedicated himself to helping wherever he could. He woke early to assist with chores, stayed late to learn traditions and rituals, and sought guidance whenever he felt uncertain. Slowly, the tribe began to recognize his efforts. Members who had once been skeptical started to acknowledge his commitment with nods, smiles, or small gestures of trust. John realized that true acceptance required patience and effort. It wasn't enough to have saved a life. He had to demonstrate care, understanding, and respect every day in every action. The growing connection with Aeon also faced challenges. Their bond had deepened, but it was tested by external expectations and internal uncertainties. John often wondered whether he was truly prepared to honor the sacred law in the long term. He reflected on his own life, his previous plans, and the future he had imagined for himself. Living with the tribe demanded sacrifices and a level of commitment he had never faced before. He could not ignore the cultural, emotional, and social responsibilities that came with his unique position. These thoughts sometimes caused him worry, but he knew that facing these challenges was essential for growth and understanding. One day, the elders organized a ceremony to celebrate the bond between the community and those who had contributed to the tribe's well-being. John was invited to participate, but it was clear that his role would be observed carefully. He listened intently to Aeon's guidance, trying to follow every step correctly. As the ceremony unfolded, he noticed the pride in the faces of the elders, the respect in the gestures of the community, and the quiet acknowledgement of his sincerity. John felt a mix of relief and humility. He understood that acceptance was a continuous process, not a single event, and that the sacred law required patience, reflection, and genuine care. In the evenings, John often walked with Aeon along the river, reflecting on the day's events. They spoke quietly, sharing thoughts, fears, and hopes. John admitted that he sometimes felt uncertain about his role and worried that he might not meet the tribe's expectations. Aeon reassured him, explaining that sincerity, effort, and willingness to learn mattered far more than perfection. She reminded him that he had already demonstrated courage, care, and respect, qualities that were valued far more than any mistake he could make. These conversations strengthened their bond, creating trust, understanding, and mutual support. John also observed the subtle ways in which the sacred law influenced the tribe's daily life. It was not a rigid rule but a living principle that shaped interactions, expectations, and responsibilities. It encouraged empathy, respect, and care for one another. John realized that his connection to Aeon was a doorway into understanding these deeper values. He began to see patterns in behavior, gestures, and rituals that reflected a philosophy of life centered on balance, respect, and community. The sacred law was not merely about obligation. It was about learning to live in harmony with others and the world around him. Despite the challenges, John also discovered moments of joy and satisfaction. Helping a family with their daily work, participating in a small celebration, or simply sharing a quiet moment with Aeon brought a sense of accomplishment and belonging. He realized that the journey was not only about fulfilling responsibilities, but also about experiencing life fully, appreciating connections, and learning from every interaction. Each day offered an opportunity to grow, to understand, and to contribute meaningfully to the community that had welcomed him cautiously but sincerely. However, John knew that challenges were far from over. The expectations placed upon him were ongoing, and he would have to navigate cultural differences, personal doubts, and social complexities for the foreseeable future. Every interaction carried meaning, and every choice could influence his acceptance and his relationship with Aeon. He reflected on the responsibility he had accepted, not as a burden but as a guiding principle, and he felt determined to honor it fully. The sacred law had become a compass, pointing him toward growth, understanding, and connection. As part 4 of his journey unfolded, John understood a vital truth. Living in a new culture required humility, patience, and an open heart. Challenges were not obstacles but lessons, guiding him toward deeper understanding and respect. His connection with Aeon had grown stronger through shared experiences, learning, and trust. He realized that responsibility, when embraced sincerely, could transform uncertainty into purpose, fear into confidence, and obligation into meaningful action. John had learned that true belonging was earned over time, through effort, respect, and dedication, not simply through heroic acts or words alone. By the end of this part, John had grown more confident in his ability to navigate the complexities of life within the tribe. He had faced challenges that tested his patience, understanding, and commitment. He had learned to listen carefully, act thoughtfully, and respect the sacred laws that guided the community. Most importantly, he had deepened his bond with Aeon, building a foundation of trust, care, and mutual respect that would continue to shape the next phase of their journey. John realized that the path ahead would require continued effort, but he felt prepared to face it, knowing that he was no longer alone and that he had the support of both Aeon and the community. With time, John began to feel fully part of the tribe. What had once been a simple act of bravery, saving Aeon from the river, had transformed into a life-changing journey for both of them. He had learned to respect and understand the sacred law, the traditions, and the deep wisdom of the community. More importantly, he had learned to grow alongside Aeon, forming a connection built on trust, care, and mutual respect. Life in the tribe had become a rhythm that blended responsibility, learning, and genuine human connection. Every day brought new experiences that deepened John's understanding of the tribe. He helped gather food, learned to prepare traditional meals, and participated in ceremonies that honored their ancestors and the natural world. The rituals that had once seemed mysterious and intimidating now felt meaningful. He understood that each song, gesture, and tradition carried lessons about respect, community, and harmony with nature. John realized that these teachings were far more important than any skill or knowledge he could learn elsewhere. They shaped not only behavior but also character, guiding people toward kindness, understanding, and thoughtful action. His connection with Aeon continued to grow. They spent hours walking together through the forest, learning about plants, animals, and the wisdom embedded in every aspect of their surroundings. Aeon taught John not only practical skills but also the deeper lessons behind them: patience, observation, and the importance of living in balance with the land. John admired Aeon's intelligence, her calm strength, and the way she carried herself with quiet confidence. In turn, Aeon appreciated John's sincerity, his willingness to learn, and his gentle respect for her culture and traditions. Together, they shared laughter, stories, and quiet moments of reflection, each one strengthening the bond between them. Over time, the elders began to treat John not as an outsider but as a trusted member of the community. They consulted him on practical matters, included him in discussions, and acknowledged his efforts with nods and smiles. John realized that respect was not given freely. It was earned through patience, effort, and sincerity. His journey had taught him that being part of a community meant more than participation. It meant understanding, contribution, and shared responsibility. He no longer felt like a visitor. He felt like someone who belonged, who had found a place where his actions and intentions mattered. The sacred law, which had initially seemed like a burden, became a guide for living. John understood that it was not about obligation alone. It was about growth, respect, and meaningful relationships. It reminded him to act thoughtfully, to support Aeon, and to contribute positively to the community. Each decision he made was informed by this principle, guiding him toward understanding and harmony rather than conflict or misunderstanding. Through this process, John discovered a sense of purpose he had never experienced before. The law that had once seemed intimidating now felt like a pathway toward becoming a better person, someone capable of empathy, patience, and care. One of the most memorable moments came during a community celebration. The tribe had organized a festival to honor the changing seasons and the abundance of the land. John was invited to participate fully. He helped prepare food, set up decorations, and assisted with the ceremonial activities. When the festivities began, John could see the joy and pride in the faces of everyone around him. Music, dancing, and laughter filled the air, and John felt a profound sense of belonging. The festival was more than entertainment. It was a celebration of life, community, and the wisdom that guided the tribe. John understood that he had not only found a place in this community, but also a deeper appreciation for the beauty and meaning in life itself. John and Aeon also shared quiet moments during the festival. They watched children play near the river, observed elders performing ceremonial dances, and spoke softly about the lessons they had learned. John reflected on how far he had come, from the moment he jumped into the river to save Aeon to this day, fully immersed in a culture he had once known nothing about. He realized that his journey had been shaped not only by courage, but also by patience, humility, and openness to learning. Aeon's guidance and support had been invaluable, and John felt grateful for the bond they had built together. As he continued to live with the tribe, John became more confident in his ability to honor the sacred law. He understood that being connected to Aeon was not about control or obligation. It was about partnership, respect, and shared responsibility. He learned to anticipate needs, offer help without being asked, and support the community in ways that aligned with their values. Through these actions, John discovered a deeper sense of fulfillment than he had ever known. He realized that saving a life was only the beginning. What truly mattered was what came after, the commitment to care, learn, and grow alongside others. John also observed the ways in which Aeon had grown through their connection. She had trusted him, guided him, and shared her world with patience and generosity. Their bond had created opportunities for understanding, learning, and friendship that neither of them could have predicted. John realized that his role was not to impose or change her life, but to be a supportive presence, someone who respected her culture and choices while contributing positively to her community. This understanding brought him peace and confidence, reinforcing the lessons of responsibility, empathy, and respect he had learned throughout his journey. The forest, the river, and the tribe's traditions became intertwined with John's sense of identity. He no longer saw himself as a visitor or an outsider. He was part of something larger, a living story of connection, trust, and growth. Each day brought new lessons, whether through helping with chores, participating in ceremonies, or simply observing the natural world. John came to appreciate the rhythm of life in the tribe, the importance of community, and the value of small, thoughtful actions that built trust and understanding over time. By the end of his journey, John had transformed in ways he could not have imagined. He had grown in patience, empathy, and cultural understanding. He had learned that heroism was not just about a single brave act, but about the sustained effort to honor commitments, respect traditions, and contribute meaningfully to the lives of others. His bond with Aeon had deepened into a lasting connection based on trust, care, and mutual respect. He had become not only a part of her life, but also a valued member of the tribe, respected and appreciated for his sincerity and dedication. John often reflected on how a single moment, the day he saved Aeon from the river, had changed everything. What had begun as a spontaneous act of courage had grown into a life filled with learning, connection, and purpose. The sacred law, once mysterious and intimidating, had guided him toward understanding, respect, and harmony. Through patience, effort, and openness, John had discovered the true meaning of belonging, the depth of human connection, and the value of living in alignment with principles that honor both people and the world around them. As the sun set on the forest, casting a warm glow over the river and the tribe's homes, John sat quietly with Aeon. They watched the water ripple gently, listened to the soft sounds of the forest, and felt a deep sense of peace. Their journey together had been unexpected, challenging, and profoundly rewarding. John understood that life was full of moments that could change everything, and that the true measure of these moments was not only the action itself, but the growth, connection, and understanding that followed. In that quiet evening, John felt a sense of fulfillment and belonging that would stay with him forever. In the end, John realized that saving a life was just the beginning. The real journey was in learning, connecting, and growing with the people he had touched and who had touched his life in return. The sacred law had become a living principle, guiding him to be patient, respectful, and caring. His bond with Aeon and the tribe had grown into a deep, lasting connection that shaped not only his present but also his future. John had learned that true heroism is found not only in brave actions, but in the quiet, ongoing efforts to honor, respect, and nurture the lives of those around us.